your hair?
I did. I did.
Okay.
We need some renewed energy. So that goes, on
Yeah,
all the levels.
that's part of the renewed energy. All right. Thank you all for joining wherever you are. And I hope that you made it with the daylight saving time. My name is Joseph Avasar. Today we have May PUNDAK, who will be speaking about her organization, Land for All. We are the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We have a different vision. However, we believe in inviting as many people as possible to speak about their vision, because the most important thing is peace. And so what we're going to have today, we will have May speak about her organization and their vision of peace. And then we will speak about, and then I'll ask her some questions, and then the audience will be permitted to ask questions. And if we have time, we will try to do the simulation of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. Okay, so May PUNDAK is a feminist lawyer, activist, and social entrepreneur. She was the director of Polyphony of the Polyphony Foundation, establishing a legal team to support political struggle in East Jerusalem. She co-founded an educational dialogue group program for Jewish and Palestinian teenagers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. She worked for the New Israel Fund, leading campaigns for social change and building a community based on renewed relationship between American Jewry and Israeli civil society. May PUNDAK graduated Harvard University Leadership, Community Organization, and Activism course. She obtained a teaching certificate in civics and a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in public and international law with an emphasis on human rights from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Just want to tell you that, about our upcoming events. On November 13, we will have Aaron David Miller. He's a former U.S. State Department Middle East analyst and a negotiator on behalf of Republican and Democratic administration. Many of you are familiar with him. And then on November 27, we will have Mordechai Kedar, who is received his PhD from Bar-Ilan University, but he's known in Israel as the previous IDF military intelligence officer on Islamic issues and current pundit defending Israel. He's very, very well known, mostly in Israel. I don't think he's that known internationally. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to give the stage to May. And May, if you need me to give you ability to share the screen, let me know, and we'll make you a co-host.
Thank you, Joseph. And thank you for organizing this very, very important space. It's really tremendous to see that people return and come and listen time after time, and that people are interested in this issue. And so thank you for creating this space. I would like to tell you a little bit about our organization, A Land for All. We're also joined by one of our founders, Meron Rapaport. So, hi, Meron. And so what I wanted to start with is maybe, I really prefer not to present A Land for All as, another version of the Confederation, because that's not, the story why I joined A Land for All. And it's also, I think right now, I think that what we should do is really try to think about the challenges that we face today in the Middle East and in Israel and Palestine, and through that see what it is that we need to do. And so maybe I'll tell you a few words about why I joined A Land for All, and through that I'll tell you about the organization. So my name is Mai, and thank you, Joseph, for the introduction. I actually lived in the States, and I see some familiar faces. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see you all. I lived in the States for a few years. I was working at the New Israel Fund at the time. When I left left Israel, to move to the States, it was before the 2014 war in Gaza. And I remember that I was in New York in the 2014 war, and I remember the moment that things were, that seemed broke. And it was devastating being so far away from home, maybe safer physically, but devastating emotionally to be so far away from Israel, Palestine, while such a horrendous, events were happening. And I remember that something, clicked for me at that time already, saying, something isn't working, negotiation is stuck. Israel and Palestine, the situation is getting worse and worse. Occupation is getting, it was weird. We were just about to hit the 50th mark for the occupation at the time, and things were feeling that they're going to stay like this forever. And it's sad to say that nearly 10 years later, things have gotten maybe even worse. So when I came back a few years later to Israel, a lot changed in those years. And I came back to Israel with a small family. I had a 1-year-old kid. And I came back and I was, seeking to get involved in something to build the future around here. But I came back for the second round of election, where a day before the elections here and over there in the States. Back then it was the second cycle of elections, and no party was talking about the future of this conflict. None. I mean, the Palestinian parties were a little bit, but also not with a vision. And all the Jewish parties were just pretty much ignoring the conflict altogether. And I think that was another moment in my story where I was like, okay, something isn't working. I mean, this is Israel we're talking about. This is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is a conflict that really our whole life, our whole economy, our whole narrative, our whole being depends on. And here I am, a young woman with a young family returning to Israel, and no one is offering me any vision or anything to dream for or fight for or hope for. And I was very upset. And that's when I found A Land for All, actually. That was the moment where I was like, okay, here is a group of people, which are Israelis and Palestinians, very important to start with. A group of Israelis and Palestinians who have kind of hit the same, ceiling of, we're frustrated, this cannot go on, no one is giving us any answers, no one is even brave enough to ask any difficult questions about our reality here in the region. And therefore, we're kind of, Israelis are comfortably numb and just sitting comfortably in the status quo, and Palestinians' life are getting worse and worse and worse. And this cannot go on. And what can we do? What can we do with this, stagnation? And that's the moment where I met this group, and so they presented this idea of a confederation to me. So I want to say two things about this idea of confederation, and maybe then I'll tell you a little bit more in details what we're suggesting. But the idea of confederation is I would say threefolded. One is we need a stable, sustainable, just, practical, relevant solution, and we need it now. What can we do in order to get there without letting go of this intention or dream or even more practically, just a solution? That's number one. Number two is our values. We are a two-state solution version. We see ourselves as part of the family, maybe, of the two-state solution, but we are a new iteration of that. And why is that important to say? Because we believe that in the few years that, since 10 years ago, since this idea was established, we've also been hearing Bibi Netanyahu talking about a two-state solution, which leads us to understand, as an example, that the two-state solution has kind of lost its maybe spine or alignment to progressive values such as justice and equality. And so for us, it's very, very important to, hold that very strong. We are not giving up on equality and justice. The second part is that we are trying to actually offer a new paradigm to think about this conflict. This paradigm is the paradigm of sharing. And I'll say a little more about that later, but if you just, if you just think about sharing as a paradigm, or partnership, that partnership is based on two equal entities, or at least aspiring to be two equal entities. And so, that's kind of an expression of the equality. And that also leads us to two independent states. But the other component is sharing. This partnership is built on sharing and on a shared future. And that means that we're talking about some joint mechanisms that will try to maintain this shared and mutual homeland. So how do we make sure that we are accountable to each other? How do we make sure that this is, sustainable, and that people won't see this as a zero-sum game again? That's where the confederative mechanisms come into place, there to make sure that we have legal systems for the sharing component. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about elaborate a little more about what we talk about when we talk about a land for all. If you remember the May events from 2021, you remember that these events started in Al-Aqsa, in Al-Quds, in Jerusalem, but then they, were all over our region, in Ramle and in Lod, in 48 and 67, in Gaza. They were all in Haifa, in Akko. And I think that's maybe a good moment to remember, because that was a moment, I think, for a lot of Israelis realizing that you cannot separate the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people will not, don't see this big Palestine as two different states. Yes, they are willing to think about two different political entities, but when Palestinians talk about Palestine, they talk about the entire homeland, from the river to the sea, as we say. And I think that's an important, concrete moment for us. If you think about Israeli Jews, you will probably get the same answer. Yes, we're willing to talk about two states. Yes, we're willing to talk about a Jewish democratic states within the Green Line. But when we talk about our sentiment, our feeling, our emotion, what we fought for, for all these years, we still talk about Hebron, and we talk about Nablus, about Shechem, and we talk about the entirety of the land. That's where the sentiment lies. So I think that that's a very important, close historian moment for us to think about, which is that the two people really see this entire land as their homeland. And for me, as the lefty Jew in Israel, that's actually a difficult thing to accept. And I'll say maybe one thing about that, because I think that's important for where I'm coming from. And I grew up in Tel Aviv, and I grew up in a secular lefty family. And so for me growing up, I actually didn't have any, and I still don't have in my immediate recollection any relationship with the West Bank. But the older I get, and hopefully the wiser I get, I understand that the Jewish people really do. And the majority of Jews living in this country have a very strong sentiment to this piece of land. And if I can try to, I can maybe, not accept it or try to fight it. But I'm thinking that the more I actually try to understand that this sentiment is so strong that it leads us to the reality that we are today, maybe that will lead me to a more practical solution to this problem. Because I think that one of the problems really is that when we talked about negotiations and the peace agreement until now, this sentiment hasn't been taken about directly. And so I want to bring that into, this mutual kind of picture that we're painting together. The fact that we need to acknowledge that both Jews and Palestinians have a very strong sentiment to the entirety of this homeland. Now, this is where we normally get into the zero-sum game, right? Like, how can two people fight on one land? Okay, so it's an either or kind of situation. And this is where we say, Actually, no. Actually, no. Why don't we say, yes, this is one homeland, it belongs to all of us, and in this homeland, two different political entities can exist. The geography, the physical space is shared by all of us. But the political identities, yes, there are two. There's the Palestinian people and there's the Israeli people. And those are two separate political identities, and we respect that. We don't think that that needs or can actually be erased right now. Those things are very, very strong. And I'll tell you even more. And I'm already kind of, going into our next discussion, Joseph, but I think that skipping the phase of the fact that Palestinian people deserve a right of self-recognition is very, very dangerous for the sustainability of this relationship in this region. And I'll also say that the Israeli Jewish people are very, very traumatized and forever seeking a safe haven. And this haven, the state of Israel, has never been safe. And so sustainable peace between Israel and Palestine, hopefully, is the answer to that. And so, okay, so now we're talking about two different political entities, but one homeland. What does that mean, one homeland? Well, for us, that means an acknowledgement of this mutual belonging, which is a lot. We don't take acknowledgement lightly in conflict resolution. Sometimes acknowledgement is everything. And so that's number one. But we also have a practical answer, which means a confederation, which means open borders, which means that we all have the right to exercise our belonging to this homeland. And so what we aspire to are open borders. What we aspire to are Israeli Jews being able to live in, historic Israel, or in Palestine, or behind the Green Line, or whatever we want to call it. And what we're aspiring to also is allowing Palestinians to live and work and travel and be where they belong, which is also Lod and Akko and Haifa and Gaza and Tel Aviv and Yafo, wherever they feel a sense of belonging to their homeland, which is definitely not only in the West Bank and Gaza. What we also talk about is the Palestinian right of return. And so before I say something about the right of return, what I want to say is what we're already seeing through our political program is that we are able to address both emotionally, but also politically, very sticky obstacles and challenges that have made negotiation until today impossible, like the right of return in refugees, like the issue of borders. These issues are where normally things break. And for us, through this paradigm of sharing, through this idea of partnership, we actually overcome these big topics. I don't want to say easily, because nothing about this is easy, but suddenly those things are not a challenge anymore. And so I'm going to take one step up for a moment before I continue talking about the right of return, because I think that for me, again, this is where I felt that suddenly I can see again. So after many, many years of this frustration within, this preaching the two-state solution, and in the same time seeing that nothing is moving, nothing is changing, and I'm talking about the two-state solution, but occupation and racism and hatred and despair are getting stronger and stronger and stronger on the ground, and I felt stuck, and I felt that I felt that I see black, that I can only see black, because the two-state solution doesn't feel viable anymore in the version that I know. One state was not relevant. And so what am I supposed to do, as an Israeli striving for peace? And so suddenly seeing that there's another political option, another political idea, another political program that not only lets me exercise my values, but actually gets me out of this loop, was a huge gift for me, because it gave me hope. And so I think that's another very important component that we lead with, which is hope and political imagination. And again, if this is a group of people who care about peace, I guess that you know that that's very rare to see and to meet. Hope, or any kind of a vision for the future that makes sense. And so I want to put that, underline that as well. Okay, so going back to a few of our principles. So we talked about open borders. We talked about Jews and Palestinians being able to live beyond these borders. I was about to say something about refugees, and maybe then I'll say something about the political differentiation between the two states. So the idea is that Palestinian refugees could come back to the state of Palestine, which would be an independent state that will allow them to receive their citizenship and vote for the Palestinian parliament. But then they as well could, exercise their right to live in this homeland and therefore return to work or live wherever they want in the homeland. This is, slowly but surely and gradually and with all the mechanisms of security that we need. What's important to say about this is that the Palestinian people will have their citizenship, and so they won't be able to vote for the parliament in Israel. And same goes for the Jewish people who would choose to live beyond the Green Line in Palestine, in approval of the Palestinian state, without any IDF, or I'll go further and say Jews could live in the West Bank under the Palestinian rule if they accept the sovereignty of Palestine and without maintaining Jewish superiority. That is, the how do you say t'nai, Meron?
Condition.
Condition. Thank you. That is our condition, right? So we believe that people should have a way to exercise their belonging to the land. But what we do not accept is Jewish superiority, any kind of superiority. What we do not accept is not accepting the international law. And so right now, as we see the reality, yes, settlements are illegal, of course. And what we do want to say as well, apropos the accepting the international law, is the Green Line. So land for all, again, one of the big issues of the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations until now has been the borders. Like, what do we do with the borders? Settlements are getting bigger, and so the Green Line is forever, looking like this and just taking a little more and a little more here from Palestine, a little bit here from Palestine, and then giving some land swap in the Negev, which is completely disconnected to where, the Palestinians actually need land to grow or to become an actual state. And so what we say is like, let's not give that power to the settlement movement. Let's say that the Green Line is the Green Line. Two states, Israel and Palestine, separate states, but the borders are open, but people can move and behave and live their life freely. Two more things I want to say about our model. One is Jerusalem, which I think is very important. I don't know how many of you have been to Jerusalem or have been to Jerusalem lately. The idea of separating it and building a big wall in the middle is, I don't know what word to use, but doesn't seem realistic, let's say. Not to say very sad. And I think that actually no one in Jerusalem would want that, if we care about what the people on the ground actually want. And so what we're offering is an open city. Jerusalem will have a special status like some other cities in conflict areas that are based on power sharing, and the old city will have a special mechanism that will, take care of that special area that might have international governance, or, we'll have to see, obviously, but just taking Jerusalem as a very special place and giving it the special attention that we need without trying to separate it and break it into two. And the third component, which I think is important to talk about, is really the shared institutions. And so what we're saying, and maybe this is, maybe I'll end with saying a few words about separation and part versus partnership and sharing. The idea of shared institutions, and this is a group that is familiar with the Confederation idea, so it's good to be among people who understand. But the idea of the shared institutions are that both on the practical level and on the more identity-based maybe level, there's a lot that we share. So I talked a lot about this notion of a homeland that we share. But if you think about things very straightforward, like the environment, like global warming, or like like climate change, if you think that Israel can do anything to fight against climate change by itself without Palestinians, that's crazy. That's crazy. If we think that we can deal with anything like water on our own, or any kind of natural resources, or air pollution, I mean, that's just impossible. And so, that's a good place to start using our political imagination to say, oh, right, we can't actually do this on our own. So what are we supposed, what can we do? We can't do this alone. So what are we supposed to do? Our answer to that is do it together, do it in partnership. But let me take you to a more maybe extreme question about security. So if you ask today leading figures, security figures in Israel, they will tell you that Jewish people in Israel, Palestinians don't have security at all, which is also important to state. But Jews in Israel have security a lot because of the collaboration with the PLO, a lot. We depend on the collaboration with the PLO. It's not only the separation barrier. It's much, much more than that. And so it's important for me to say that even on the things that we think that are, immediately like, oh yes, Israel and Palestine, let's separate, let's put a big wall. Even there, it's important to say how dependent we are. And so I have, and I can mention the economy, and I can mention the workforce, and I can mention transportation, and I can mention a lot of things that if you actually go today on the ground in Israel, Palestine, you will find that sharing and partnership are in many levels prevailing. You can actually see them, or maybe if once you put that lens, you understand that it's impossible to unsee them. And that's very, very important as well, because I think that for us, we are not seeking only an idea, we're seeking something realistic. And for us, that's a sign that we're in the right direction, because things are getting more and more dependent. Yes, there's racism. Yes, there's Jewish superiority. Yes, there's occupation. But still, the people and these two entities are impossible to really separate. And now I'll just say a few more words about separation, and then I'll end this part of the presentation, which is we've tried separation, or at least we've tried to offer separation. And I think that if we follow the history of separation, we see a few things, and I'll give you a few anecdotes. One is the unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. That didn't go so well. So I'm giving that as an example of, we can't do that. You can't unilaterally withdraw and expect something positive or sustainable to come out of that. The second is that when we talked to folks like Yossi Beilin and people who were part of the Oslo Accords, this sentence of we're here and they are there. Have you heard about this sentence before? It's a very common phrase between, that Israelis talk about the Palestinians. And that was kind of a catchphrase after Oslo, we'll be here, they will be there, and then we'll divorce and we'll never see them again, pretty much. That's a very problematic saying, to say the least, for two reasons. One is that they themselves regretted it. And I think that's important to say, that they themselves, the people who wrote the Oslo Accords and were part of this effort to create peace, understood that phrase was taken too far. That's not what they meant, to never see Palestinians again. And the second part of that is that it kind of became this part of our identity of, divorce the Palestinians, never want to see them, we don't want anything to do with them. This villa in the jungle notion of Israel being part of, this European modern world, and Palestinian being, part of the Middle East, barbaric a neighborhood. And we see how that translates into racism. We see how that translates into hatred. We see how that transfers into Jewish superiority. And that is very problematic and not a good recipe for a sustainable peace. And so I think that what we're trying to do is really go back in time and offer something new, a new paradigm to see this situation, this conflict, and through going back in time to really ask ourselves, what is the best program that will allow us to have a sustainable peace in this place? And our answer is Confederation. Our answers are two independent sovereign states exercising our right of self-determination in this land, equality, between these two different political entities, but one homeland. And so confederative models, and so sharing the land, and so sharing this notion that we need to do this together or not do it at all. And I think that through doing this together, through changing the paradigm into sharing, and you see this in places like Northern Ireland or in the Balkan region, you see that the idea of the paradigm of sharing is what works today. It's not perfect, but it actually works. And we're driving inspiration from that, and maybe also from the European Union, which I think is another kind of idea that people never imagined could happen, but is looking pretty okay if you compare it to 200 years ago. And so I want to end with just saying that I think that it's time for us to bring back the idea that this conflict can be resolved and start thinking very carefully about what is that we can do in order to change the discourse from a place of stagnation and lack of hope, and leading to occupation and to apartheid and to things that we really don't want to go through that slippery slope even further. And also to respect the idea that, there are two people who want to live safely in this land.
All right, thank you, May. I would like to ask you some clarification questions. You mentioned the connection, the emotional connections and the historical connections, both the Palestinians and the Jewish people to the land. And I think you specifically said to the entire land, not just to part of the land, but the entire, on both sides. So why are you not proposing a one state under one government?
So there are a few ways to answer that question. The first, I'll say two things. One is that, and I can tell you, for me as an Israeli, and for us as Israelis who are part of this group, and for our Palestinian partners as well, our desire right now is a free, safe, independent state. But both of the people here, that's what they want, both Israelis and Palestinians. What we don't, that's our main goal. We want to live in peace. We want to live in peace, and we want to be respected like every other people around the world. And we want a state that recognizes that. I think that for the Palestinian people, they have never had that right. And so I don't think they're going to give that up anytime soon. For the Israelis, as I mentioned earlier, I think that we live in such trauma that until we don't have a safe Israel, we won't be quiet. We won't be able to heal, honestly. And so for me, that's the main reason. I'll say just one more thing. I think that right now, at least as a step on the way, at least as a transitional period, practically, I don't think you can skip that phase. I think that the power dynamic is too strong and the gap is too big, and that people are not ready to live in one state. And I think that would be very, very dangerous. Very dangerous.
All right. you mentioned about the right of return, about open border, about Palestinians and Israelis being able to live in both sides, and um, other legal rights on both sides. Who will actually, in your vision, who will actually agree to those visions, to implement the vision that you're expressing? Would that be the Israeli and the Palestinian governments? And if so, why are you not a party in the Israeli or the Palestinian side? But who do you envision will be implementing your vision?
Yes, this is definitely, we still live in we live, I mean, yeah, it's a very interesting conversation. Is Israel a democracy while occupying millions of Palestinians? But let's say that we Israelis have the privilege of still living in a democracy. And so yes, I think that definitely that's where we want this to come from. I will even go further to say that I think that one of the problems in the solutions until now that they were many of the time led or strongly led by partisans outside of Israel, Palestine, therefore maintaining the dynamic between the two nations. And that's a problem. And so, yes, this needs to be a movement coming from the people of Israel and Palestine, therefore from the governments and from the people bottom up. As for your question about why are we not a party, maybe we will be. Right now, that is not our theory of change. We are working with decision makers. We are also talking to people around the world, definitely seeing the international community, the Palestinian diaspora, the Jewish progressive community around the world, all of these as our partners and allies. But right now, we're definitely working from that angle.
All right, one more question, and then I'll open up for the audience to ask questions. The two-state, you have a different version of the two-state that has been suggested by the United Nations in 1947, but many versions of two states have come about and they all failed. Do you think that it's still wise to discuss a two-state when the vision of two-state has failed, and actually not only failed, but caused a lot of grief and a lot of violence since it was implemented, including the War of Independence, which is a subsequent violence to the two-state partition plan by the UN, and then subsequent more of two-state brought more violence.
Right. I would say that the notion, but definitely in Palestine, has changed and is still changing very much since 47. And I would say that the problem is not necessarily the two states. I think the problem is that when you talk through the prism of separation, you actually resist any option of reconciliation. I think that when you talk through separation, you then, it's easy to just drop into this idea that we're only enemies. But in Israel and Palestine case, we are not. We are actually physically binded. Not only because 20% of our society in Israel are Palestinians, and not Arab Israelis, Palestinians, people with a Palestinian identity. Not only because of that, but also because of what I mentioned earlier, because of the economy, because of the borders, because of our sentiment to the entire of the homeland, because of pollution and climate, because of all these reasons, we are stuck together, okay, for better and worse. And I think that the problem is not two-state or one state, or that's already, you're talking about the form. I think that what's important is the content, and the content is switching from trying to divorce these two people and putting a big wall and never seeing each other again, and maintaining this kind of like Dr. Zeus, we hate you and you put your butter from up and we put our butter from, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. I think that what we need to do is check again, how do we make sure that our values and our vision and our hope and our dreams and our safety and our security can practically be achieved. And for me right now, from what I know, the only path is partnership and sharing, and the model is the Confederation. So 2 states and 1 homeland.
All right. I would like to open up for the audience. If you have, please raise either your biological hand or your Zoom hand, and to ask questions. I think a lot of you. Okay, let's start with Libby. Libby.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your presentation. I live in California. We've had 30 years of Jewish-Palestinian dialogue activities. And we say an enemy is one whose story you have not heard. And we started that by thinking that instead of calling it the Jewish-Palestinian conflict, which keeps it at that, we call it the Jewish-Palestinian relationship. And I think that if we could change our mindset and start having the governments allow the Israeli Jews and the Palestinians to cross borders, meet each other as they did 50 years ago, it could make a huge difference. But the governments have tightened up so much on who can meet where, and security has become so extreme that it causes great fear in the communities. How can we move beyond that way of thinking that proves, that assures that being in relationship makes a huge difference when people, when their kids go to school together, when you learn each other's languages, when you appreciate each other's cultures? How can we move in a direction? How can we get the governments to be supportive of building this new Jewish-Palestinian relationship?
Thank you, Libby. Hi, it's good to see you. That's a very complicated question, and I'm struggling every day to have a good answer to that question. I'll say some thoughts, and I hope that they will be worthwhile. One is that, let's start with being positive. The world of shared society, which used to be called the world of coexistence in Israel, and I'm talking about, Israeli Palestinians' relationship within Israel. So within the 48, within the Green Line, has moved pretty incredibly in the past 10 years. 10 years ago, Israelis and Palestinians within Israel were much further removed than they are today, and much more separated and segregated. And I think that we've seen in 10 years a pretty incredible move. And I think that one testament is the previous government, which was the first time a coalition was dependent on Palestinian citizens of Israel. And we can say a lot of things about this government, but the fact that that government exists, for me, is a sign of hope. But there are many other ways that I can share with you about how that world has developed in the past 10 years. Palestinians are more present in the public space. They get more leading positions. There's more money given to the Palestinian society in Israel than ever before. So one thing is to say that paradigm of sharing that I've been trying to talk so much about in the past 45 minutes is something that is already kind of infiltrating our society in Israel. And I would want to make a case that our paradigm just gives the other kind of side of that same coin, just beyond the green line. And so the more Jewish and Palestinians meet, the more people are involved, the more we have to share, the better, because then it gets into all the cycles. And today you see that Israeli government, even the right-wing government, Bibi Netanyahu is the prime minister. I hate to say anything good about Bibi today, but I will say this, that it's the government that spent the most money in Palestinian infrastructure within Israel, not behind the green line. That's remarkable, and only because it's worthwhile economically. but you start understanding that there are more interests here, right? On Palestinian-Israeli collaboration and Palestinian-Israeli partnership. There are many, many good reasons to do that. And so that's maybe the positive thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say is, and this is very important about our organization, and maybe for me personally as well, as someone who came from the people-to-people work, it's very important to have a solution and a vision. Very important. It's not enough to meet people, I think. It's not enough to have good relationships. It's not enough because we see that the power dynamic stays the same. Palestinians go back to occupation, and Israelis go back to bubbly Tel Aviv. And that is that, and they feel that there's no reason to do anything because they already met Palestinians. So they're, self-congratulating themselves. I'm talking about myself. That was my activism, meeting Palestinians. But I didn't do anything to also make sure that we are struggling to end the conflict. And I think that's very important. I don't think those two contradict, but I think we have to be committed to end the conflict now, to end occupation now. There's no time. So for me, that's a very important component of relationships.
All right, let's go to Judith Paulson and then Sharon Perez. Judith, you need to unmute.
Sorry, I'm Judith from South Carolina. I'm driving in my car, but I admire you very much, Mai. I just think this is such good words coming from you. However, being from the South in the United States, I know separate is never equal because the one side always is superior to the other. It really definitely does control the other. And nobody really wants this to happen. So what you are looking at is getting together in government. That's the only way. Eventually, you're going to have to. I want you to end the occupation, but I want you to also be together in government. Have both Jewish and Palestinians write up an entirely new government that is a democracy for everyone. And there should be no insecurity for Israel from that point on, as long as, make everyone get a chance to vote on this. But it should be an extensive frame of government. And it should be talked about as the way forward for relationships that will be working and in peace. And you will automatically lose fear of each other because you're in government. And the so-called Hamas or the so-called Fatah, they would have to sign on, and so would all the Israelis. It'd have to be a majority would sign on to this. But I believe that sort of government is the way to have security. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Judith. I'll just say a short maybe remark. I wouldn't compare the separate but equal paradigm to Israel and Palestine, and I'll tell you. I mean, let's say this. It's what I wanted to say is that the Black community in the U.S. Was fighting against the separate but equal policy, but here we still see Palestinians fighting for a Palestinian independent state. So I think that's the most important thing. And as an Israeli-Palestinian organization that is based on partnership, this is a question for the Palestinian part, which isn't here. And I think that's a good idea for you to maybe invite someone from the Palestinian side to speak to you as well. We actually had a very interesting conversation with Auni El-Mashni, the co-founder of this organization, who is a very progressive, very, very incredible leader. who believes in equality and believes in prosperity and believes in everything. But a few weeks ago, we had a really interesting conversation, and he said, you know, Mai, at the end of the day, I want a Palestinian state. This is what I want. And I think that I think that confederation and this model of confederation is what will get us there in my lifetime. And I think that that's what you should aspire to as well. You aspire for an Israeli independent, safe state. This is what is going to get you there as fast as possible. And so I want to say that, you know, maybe in 200 years, we'll be ready for one democratic state. I have some leftovers of my pragmatic upbringing. And so I'm committed to bringing a solution that I think will take us forward as fast as possible, but still in a way that I think is sustainable for now. So.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's go to Sharon Perez and then John Mitchell and then Nancy Delaney.
Okay, shalom everyone. I'm here in Tel Aviv, Israel, but as you can hear, I'm originally from the USA. Been here for many, many, many years though, very involved with, I'm a peace activist as you are, Mai, and I see some other people here I know, Meron, Rappaport and others. I'm from Women Wage Peace. You see my blue bracelet. Well, first of all, you actually replied to her, Mai, but what Libby Troutman of California said, well, she doesn't live here, and I don't think sorry, Libby, but you know, you have to understand there you are. We actually, there's dozens of meetings, hundreds all the time. It's true there's a border and you need to get permits for them to come into Israel. They need permits. For us to go into there, we don't exactly need permits, but we kind of, you know, the average Israeli maybe isn't so willing to do that. I've been there's plenty of meetings happening all the time, face to face, not enough, but they do happen constantly, and, you know, maybe more than you realize. I mean, again, the average Israeli is probably afraid to even think of going to Nablus or Jenin or other places, but there's a whole bunch of peace activists like myself who do go to these places. Not now, not right now when things are very, what's the word, heated up, but these things happen. And like Mai said, there's so many things going on together, ecological initiatives and many, many things. So first of all, but it's not, okay, so that's one thing I wanted to address to Libby Troutman. I've always thought the idea of confederation is a good one, possibly workable. I think it's a fantastic vision, but you know, kind of complicated. Mai, you mentioned, like, I mean, what I got up before to get, but I couldn't find my book. There's like an Israeli book, which I'm sure some of you have read, called Hatikva by Uri Ashi, and he also addresses what we call the core issues of the conflict, which is things like borders, the status of Jerusalem, refugees, and a few other very heavy issues. So he's kind of, I think Uri Ashi has a slightly different vision. I think confederation is a great way forward, but you know, there's not that many Israelis that are aware even yet of the ideas. And you know, I'm very involved with Women Wage
Sharon,
Peace.
could you please ask your question?
Oh, I know where they have a question. It's kind of comments. That's
Oh, okay.
okay.
All right, let's go to John Mitchell.
Hi, May, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, May, no matter what government is in control of Israel, since 1940, and in particular since 1967, what we have seen is an incremental, steady figure being expanded in by settlers settling in the West Bank, whether it's the establishment of new settlements or the expansion of existing ones. Now, no matter what government is in power, it is very unlikely the problem being resolved coming from the Knesset. So what we have seen in history is, if you go back to President Eisenhower, who forced the Israelis to retreat from their invasion in 1956. Now, ever since then, America has had great power over the policies of Israel, whether it's domestically our foreign policies. So my question is this: don't you think the practicalities would be better for you to spend your energies to lobby in America rather than in Israel to get justice for the Palestinians?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, John. Meron, do you want to answer or do you have a question?
I want maybe to answer this briefly. I think that that it is you are correct that it will hardly come from the Israeli parliament. I tend to agree. At the same time, and working in the US and maybe in the EU and maybe in the Arab world, maybe in the Egypt, Jordan, EU, the Emirates have also power. So there are a lot of places where we can act, but I think what is powerful, and this is my impression when we went outside to the EU and elsewhere into the US, when it is coming together from this land, from Israel, Palestine, a shared voice of people saying, this is the future that we want together for this land, it is much more powerful than any pressure coming from the outside. This pressure has to come, but it must be in some reference or some connection to the voice coming from this land, from the people who want here to live like this and have a shared future.
Thank you. I'll just add to Meron. Thank you, Meron, for articulating that. I tend to agree. I would say two things. On this call, we have Johnny Jacoby, who is our incredible, one of our leaders and is living in the US and is doing incredible work in the US as well. And so I want to just, take this as an opportunity to say, like, if you support this idea and you want to support us in the US, there's ways to do that. And I totally agree, John. I would encourage you, if we want to bring change, we need all kinds of elements. We are doing our element, which is really trying to build a movement that speaks on behalf of Israelis and Palestinians who want peace and want, a just solution to this conflict. We have no doubt, and we indeed do work in other places as well, and we have very serious conversations with people in the US and in Europe. If you have ideas to who we should talk to, we are very, very happy to do so. Yes, of course, we understand there needs to be pressure on Israel to end the occupation and to go into a peace agreement. There's no interest today for the short term for Israelis to do that. And for the long term, of course, there is, but somehow people have stopped thinking about the long term. And so we encourage you to, to lead these efforts and to talk about this idea and to advocate for it, because that's extremely important. And the more people talk about it, and the more people talk about it with people who have any kind of power positions, the better. And so just to say that these things need to complete each other, our jobs as Israelis and Palestinians right now, we see is, trying to build this movement from the ground.
All right, let's go to Nancy Delaney and then Samir Twer.
Okay, thank you very much. I really applaud your imagination coming in and the working with the children. I think you're really borrowing from the best possible approaches that have showed promise in the past. And I put it in the chat, but I wanted to also verbally share it, that you might find some good example in the Haudenosaunee people. This is the Confederacy of the Iroquois. in the eastern part of what's now the United States. And it's over 200 years old, this Confederacy. It was 5 nations who were fighting each other right next to each other. And there was a 6th added, but a peacemaker came and brought them together under the great law of peace. And I did put in the chat that I do have a tape of one of the grandmothers who was part of this process. It describes how it happens, but basically they have a system that predates the US in terms of a democracy, a functioning democracy where everyone, including the children, are considered capable of knowing if people are acting well and treating each other well. And so that even the children are allowed to vote or to veto a potential candidate. And that then they, if everyone in all 6 nations agrees, then that person is there for life, except if he sheds the blood of anyone or disrespects a woman. And then it is as if he never existed. The grandmothers continue after they've chosen this person and proposed him to all 6 nations, and he is passed, then she sits on his shoulder to see that his choices are going to work well for the next 7 generations. And so this is under the great law of peace of the Iroquois Confederacy called the Haudenosaunee, Haudenosaunee, and I have it in my chat. And Chief Orrin Lyons is one of the spokespeople. He's spoken in lots of international peace gatherings and at the UN, and it's called the Longhouse form of government. It's worked well for them, those 6 nations who used to be enemies, who live right next to each other, and they are now in a confederacy. And I think there's a great promise there for what might be approached here. And I thank you all who are involved in making this presentation today.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Nancy.
you. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Samir Twer.
Hi, Joseph.
Hello, Samir.
Thank you, and thank you.
We don't see your face.
You don't. Do you want to see my face?
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Now, can you see my face?
Yeah, you're very handsome.
Thank you. Right. Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Ms. Pundak. According to what you said, Ms. Pundak, you said that the Israelis are not ready for one democratic state and not ready, that means not ready to end the apartheid regime. Well, after 74 years, I think if the Israelis are not ready today, they will never be ready. And I think that the Israeli society is sick and damaged and needs help. And the only solution is one solution, which was applied in South Africa 30 years ago. And that is BDS, boycott, sanctions, divestment sanctions, to force the change in Israel. Because actually, Israel today, either you change or you die. There is no other solution. That's what I see it, and that's the way it's supposed to go. We're dealing with a sick society and government, and is not willing to make any changes. Then we have to, the international community has to force the changes. Just like they did on South Africa 30 years ago, they should do it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir.
Bye-bye.
I do want to
have a
say,
response.
yeah, Samir, I disagree with some of what you said, and I agree with other parts of what you said. But let me just correct. Maybe I was unclear. I didn't say that Israel won't be able to end apartheid, and I didn't say that Israel won't be able to be a democratic state. That is not what I said. I said that Israel right now is not ready to give up on an Israeli state, on a solution that gives the right of the Israeli people to exercise a free and independent sovereign state. That is what I said. That state, inshallah, hopefully, with God's will be a democratic state once occupation ends. And side by side to an Israeli state, there will be a Palestinian free sovereign state. Plus equality to the Palestinian citizens living within Israel, which right now are not equal citizens. So it's very important for me to differentiate between the two. That's number one. Number two is I respect people who believe in boycott and divestment. I think that's a democratic way of resistance. For me, as an Israeli, working together in partnership with Palestinian, building a movement that is based on Israeli-Palestinian partnership, I chose a different way, and so have my Palestinian partners. And so that's another thing that I think is very strong, actually. And I'll just say that if we, moving from the BDS movement to anti-normalization movement, I think it's important to say that we are striving to find a solution to this conflict. We're not trying to normalize it or shrink it or live with it just more comfortably. We are trying to end it and end inequality. And that's very important for me to stress out if that was unclear.
What about his diagnosis of the Israeli society?
I think that part I unfortunately pretty much agree with. I think that this society right now has a very, very big problem. We don't know how to behave with the power that we were given and have taken. And that's very sad for me as a Jewish person, that, for 2,000 years, we had one practice around power. And now that we have a sovereign state, we are misusing our power and someone else is paying the price for that. And that for me makes this state being, it doesn't feel like a Jewish state for me, because that is definitely not part of my Jewish tradition.
All right, let's go next to Don Raphael and then Olivia Southwest, and then Sharon, I think you wanted to ask a question. So since you already spoke, you'll speak after Olivia. Don, please.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Mai. It's good to see you again. I believe we worked together when we were in the Bay Area. I'm Don Raphael. I'm in the Northern California area, like Libby. I'm a member of the Jewish Palestinian Living Room Dialogue Group. Been on the American Friends Board of Combatants for Peace, and I've tried frustratingly to work for peace activism in the Middle East for a long time. My question for both of you and Joseph, by extension, I know you have different concepts of confederation, but I struggle with the concept of governance, both from, you talked about having a Palestinian free sovereign state. I'm not clear between the Palestinians in the West Bank, the Palestinians in Israel proper now, and Gaza, how that representation comes together. And conversely, I'm not clear, although you did touch on it, on Israelis who would wish to live in the West Bank. And more significantly, in terms of the homeland, 2 states, 1 homeland, it's not clear to me what the homeland concept is. And in the Confederation, Joseph talks about an overlapping government that could not really enforce between the 2 sovereign states. But let's talk about your organization. I'm not clear what the concept of the homeland, the 1 state, the 1 homeland, and what governance would that have?
Okay, thank you, Don, for your good questions, as always. It's really good to see you. So I'll start, and it's good that we have Meron here to see if he can add anything. I'll start with your first question. regarding the Palestinian people, we are talking about something pretty traditional. So the Palestinian state would be Gaza and the West Bank,
Okay.
plus the right of return for refugees who will come back to the Palestinian state. We're talking about the 67 border initially. And we're talking about Palestinians for the state of Palestine to give permission to Palestinian refugees to return to its land. Okay, that's Palestinian citizens of Israel. Whoever of them would choose to move to the Palestinian land, they could, I assume. I mean, that's not for me to decide. That's for the Palestinian state to decide. Obviously, they will maintain their Israeli ID and citizenship and right for vote and etc. There are Israeli Palestinians, and it's important to say that the Palestinian citizens of Israel are, a lot of them see themselves as 100% Israeli and therefore fight for 100% of civil equality within Israel, and 100% Palestinian and therefore fighting for an independent Palestinian state. So that's for your first question. Regarding the confederative mechanisms or the homeland, what does that mean? It's a good question, and I think it's a very complicated, nuanced answer. I think that I'll say it has two main levels. One is an identity level. Okay, one of the problems that we believe that one of the problems that have prevented any solution to happen, to win, to actually peace being signed, is because it didn't admit and acknowledge the sentiment of both people to the entirety of the homeland. When you ask pretty much every Palestinian, what do they mean when they say Palestine? They talk about the entirety of Palestine. They don't see this as, oh yeah, Palestine is, until the Green Line. I started with talking about the May 21 events. Akko, Ramle, Lod, Haifa, Yafo. I mean, this is Palestine. This is much more Palestine than Ramallah. Ramallah is a new city. Ramallah has zero history. I mean, it's relevant just because we forced Palestinians out of Jerusalem and they had to find a new place to make like a center for their political, entity. And so that's Ramallah. That's not their sentiment. Their sentiment is to the beach. And so disrespecting and not acknowledging that is part, we believe, of what is preventing us from peace. By the way, same with Palestinian refugees. Israel has never accepted Palestinian refugees as part of the equation for peace. Palestinians ask them, they would say that the first thing on the agenda is Palestinian refugees. Mm-hmm. That's part of their three main issues. So again, like we are trying to, and again, not easily, but for us, those things are very natural. We understand how permanent they are for a solution. And so when I talk about a homeland, I talk about when you go in Israel and Palestine and ask people about what is Israel for you? What is Palestine for you? They will say all of this land, all of it. How do we live with that, all of it, without falling into the zero-sum game? That's the question, right? Because malasot, we say in Hebrew, like, what can we do? That's the sentiment. So we're talking about two states, one homeland, two different political entities, but geographically, physically, it's one open state. And so the best for me to invigorate your political imagination, think about Europe. My cousins from Denmark, they live in Berlin because they like Berlin. And some of my German friends, they live in Denmark because they like Denmark. They like living there, and they, got a job that they liked, or they found a Danish girl that they liked, or whatever. Like they are Danish and they are German. I mean, you're not mixing the entities, but that economically and travel wise and like living wise, and you can go and let me be even, thinking about things that we maybe can relate to. Palestinians should have a right to go to the beach, They should have access to the beach, right? I mean, of course. So we're talking about open borders. And so what we mean is that you have a political right to exercise this sense of belonging. I hope that makes it a little more clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's other sticky questions that go with it in terms of security and things like that. But I do want to ask one follow-up question, not to take up too much time here, but you talked about Israeli Palestinians, and they could become part of the Palestinian state if they moved to the West Bank or Gaza, I guess. Is it the same?
Sorry, you're talking about, are you talking about Jews, about Israeli Jews who want?
No, I'm talking about Palestinians living in Israel, Israeli Palestinians.
Okay.
A Palestinian living in the state of Israel today.
Yeah. I understand.
That they would remain Israeli citizens unless they move to either the West Bank or Gaza, I presume you're saying.
Not unless they can, they will have to choose where they vote, they will have to choose.
So they can stay.
But all the Palestinians, citizens of Israel, are staying citizens of Israel. And I would say even more, and you're very welcome, Meron, if I can ask you to maybe put a link to our vision paper in English, you will see that we actually write specifically about
Follow-up question, what about Israelis in the West Bank?
Okay, so Israeli Jews in the West Bank will also have a right to exercise their belonging to the big homeland, meaning that legally they could live in the West Bank. They will have to accept the Palestinian sovereignty and the law of Palestine. They will obviously be voting for the Israeli parliament, not for the Palestinian parliament. So they will be residents of Palestine, but citizens of Israel. And we will have to somehow find, a mechanism that will allow them to live where they feel a sense of belonging without exercising Jewish superiority and power over the Palestinian citizens of the state. So there won't be an idea of protecting them. There would be a shared mechanism between Israel and Palestine. And there would be a Palestinian security service, which will, again, have an incentive to collaborate with Israel, because citizens are everywhere. Think about yourself moving everywhere, and how you then have less interest in making the public space a dangerous place to be, because everyone is everywhere in a way. There's no physical separation. Of course there will be. Let's not be delusional. It's not that everywhere is now going to be Israeli and Palestinian shared cities, but we hope that more and more places will be living in a positive relationship of neighbors. And so, yes, Jews will be able to stay in the state of Palestine if they choose, if they choose to be part of the agreement to move out of the Green Line, back into the Green Line. Obviously, there will be a mechanism for that as well.
Okay. All right. Meron, did you want to add anything?
No, I think when we are saying one homeland, 2 states, 1 homeland, we mean that I think both Jews and Palestinian see the whole territory between the river and the sea as the homeland. So in this sense, we say 1 homeland. We think that having the ability to maintain and to fulfill this attachment to the whole of the land is basic to any agreement. This is why we therefore speak about 1 homeland. At the same time, we say 2 states, meaning that the 2 states will be on the 67 borders. And the best way to think about it is the EU, where you have independent state and open borders and freedom of movement and freedom of residence. As for Israel in the West Bank, maybe I think Yes, we're talking about freedom of movement for everyone, so it applies also for Jews who wish to live in the West Bank or Gaza. As for the settlement in themselves, the settlements as a political tool will cease to exist. We are talking about decolonizing the settlement as a political tool. There will be no more settlement. There will be Jews living there. As for the where they live, the building where they live, the real estate, it has to be decided with the Palestinian owner, with an intention not to make people move, to force people out of their homes, but it will be, there will be an agreement, has to be an agreement with the Palestinian landowners that will agree, if they agree, that it will stay. If not, they will move to another place in the West Bank.
All right.
And just sorry, Joseph,
Go ahead.
my colleague and friend Miriam just said that maybe I misunderstood part of your question, Don. So just in case, it's very important for me to say that the Palestinian citizens of Israel remain citizens of Israel. I mean, again, whatever they decide between, the Palestinian state and the Palestinian citizens of Israel, I mean, that's not for me to say, but from what I understand right now, the majority of Palestinian citizens of Israel want to stay in Israel and maintain their citizenship and maintain their right to vote within Israel. And that's 100% part of our plan. No one's revoking any citizenship.
Yeah, no, I didn't imply that, but thank you for clarifying that. But my question was, if there's a Palestinian living in Israel today, and this happened, and they wish to be part of the Palestinian state, but still live in Israel proper, pre-1967, is that okay, as you're saying, Israeli settlers?
Yeah, of
if
course,
they live under the...
Yes. Again, as Meron said, it's a freedom of movement. So anyone, initially, people could live wherever they choose. Again, as long as we dismantle and decolonize the enterprise of superiority and power, right?
And just one thing I want to say, that it's in a way the EU is the most, I think, to understand all the rules of the EU. It takes some years to understand exactly how it works, and we are here very far from a solution. So I think it's not that we want to run away from answers, but I think eventually we are not the politicians, we are not the representatives of this people of Israel, of the state of Israel, neither the state of Palestine or the PLO. I think in the end it has to be the politician that will decide exactly on every detail and every term of the agreement. What we propose here is a framework. Listen, leave separation out. It has to be shared and it has to be equal. And this is the framework that we are offering for the people that eventually will go into negotiation.
All right.
Thank you both.
I would like to announce the next questions. People ask, it'll be Olivia Southwest, and then Sharon Perez, and then Walid Abu Tayyeh, and then I don't know if Samir still wants to ask, but I put you on the as the person last. But I would like to respond because Don had mentioned my name and he also mentioned our organization, and maybe it is a good time for me to explain the difference between the vision that Land for All has and the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation has. I believe that the Israeli government and the Palestinian governments are the problem. They're not the solution. And therefore, going to them to hope that they will agree when they have been proven to be the problem simply does not make sense. So what I believe is in the creation of a common government, regardless of the wishes of the Israeli or the Palestinian government, a true democracy that will be created immediately with a separation of power, with a legislative branch, with a executive branch, and a judicial branch for the people in Gaza, the West Bank, and in Israel. And Don mentioned my program, and he said it would not have any enforcement power. To the contrary, it will have an enforcement country because it will be the only legitimate government in the area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, because Israel is not the legitimate government by its own admission. And the Palestinians is not the legitimate government by its own admission, because neither one of those governments allowed the Israeli or the Palestinians to vote. So there is no single legitimate government for the area right now. Therefore, it makes perfect sense to create a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine. We are simulating this today. Looks like we're not going to have time, but just to respond to Don, the power is the democracy, not anything else. Okay, let's go to Olivia.
Oh, hello, Joseph. Joseph, just one little thing. Somebody screwed up with the time, Joseph, because in Central Europe, Central European time is now 6:31. That means in London it's 5:31. That means in Jerusalem it is 7:31. So I logged on at the wrong time. Okay, when I logged on, I understood immediately that you were 1 hour into your meeting. And if it's you that screws up, I can forgive you anything, you know that.
Olivia,
So
it's not somebody screwed up. It's me that screwed up.
Well, I said, my second part of my sentence was, if the someone that screwed up is Joseph, I can forgive Joseph anything. So it doesn't matter. And I can listen to May's recording, you know. Now, so because of course I find it interesting. There are just two things that I can ask anyway, regardless of, and unfortunately I didn't hear her. One is very simple. It's about numbers. It's about questions like how many. Now, I noticed that there are many, over the years, I've listened to many interesting web events that are organized by Israeli NGOs, that are Israeli no-profit organizations, that are Jewish and that are pro-Palestinian, whose members are probably left-wing. I don't, I couldn't care less whether they're left, right, or whatever they are. And there are also Palestinian NGOs, and they very often liaise, or very often. So there are lots of these. Now, and they do very, very interesting stuff. The New Israel Fund, I find their web events interesting. It's all very interesting for us people living elsewhere, peeping in on people like May, or I think she pronounces her name Mai. It's all very interesting. So it's my question is this: some of you know each other. Some people like, I'm speaking to, is it May or Mai? How do I pronounce her name? Mai or May? Mai. Okay, right. It's very nice to meet you, Mai. And I will hear what you said when I listen to Joseph's recording. Okay, so it's very nice, and thank you for accepting the invitation. Some of you in these NGOs, lots of you know each other. My question is very simple. How many people? How many of you are there in Israel? Israel is very small. It's the size of, I think it's smaller than Holland. It's the size of Joseph's garden, perhaps, or his balcony, or his patio. I don't know. It's a tiny strip of land. So it's easy to sort of know about numbers, etc., etc. I mean, how many of these people, Israeli Jewish people, or Israeli Arabs, you know, pro-Palestinian, how many of you are there? Would it be 10,000? Would it be 20,000? Would it be 5,000? Would it be 100,000? I don't know. For me, that's an interesting question. My second one, and I don't have the answer. I get the impression you're a small minority. You can be clearer. My second one is about the settlements. Now, I'm not sure what your ideas are about dealing with the settlements in your future solution. And it's arrogant of me to say anything, because I'm not Jewish, I'm not Israeli, I'm not Arab, I'm sort of nothing. Here I am in Europe, reading about the horrors that happen, the horrors that people live with day in, day out. I do think it would be sheer folly to dismantle settlements, I do think it would lead to a huge war. There are apparently between 600 and 700,000 settlers. The very idea of, unless it's land swaps with agreement, let's swap a bit of land and sign a bit of paper to say that we've swapped a similar, equally fertile land elsewhere, something that would be complicated. Yes, it would be a solution, land swaps, yes. But to think of dismantling is, I think, it's out of the question. All hell would break loose. It's not even up for discussion, but who am I to say that? Okay. Anything else? I'm
So
sure
what's
there's
the
lots.
question, Olivia?
Well, no, the second one was a comment, because I can't ask a question because I'm not sure about Mai's ideas, approach to the settlement issue, because I didn't hear her into her talk. My first one was a question. How many people like you are there in Israel? How many wonderful people like you? Okay, I'm over and I'm finished. Okay, thank you, Mai. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so regarding numbers, you know the joke of how many synagogues exist in a Jewish community. Like, there are 2 Jews, so there are 3 synagogues, right? So I don't know if that's the way the joke goes. I'm Israeli, so I don't go to synagogue, but I'll say that, there's even in a small land like Israel, there's so many opinions and so many disagreements, and you can just following the elections now, that there's like all these small semantics, and even I'm saying, with air quotes, the Palestinian parties can't agree on anything, and so even the left can't. Okay, so that's just to say that, especially I think in a Jewish community, there are always a multiplicity of opinions. How many are there? Let's see the elections on Tuesday. I think that one thing that I want to say is that I think that there are more people who want to see an end to the conflict.
Oh, sure.
Than we imagine. A lot of them thinks it's impossible. And I think that for us, it's very important to be loud about our idea in order to remind people who want to end the conflict that it's possible to end the conflict. Because a lot of the people who want to end the conflict assume it's impossible. And this is in Israel and around the world. And so for me, it's very important to say to you all, we can end the conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not the most difficult, conflict in the entire history of humanity. Harder things have been solved. No one believed it would happen in Europe. No one believed it would happen, in the Balkans. No one imagined it will happen in Northern Ireland. No one believed it would happen in South Africa or in Rwanda. We are part of history, and this conflict will end as well. And as our friend Michael Skald, leading attorney for human rights, who is part of our leadership, says, one day the occupation will end. Hopefully that day will be soon.
Things have a beginning and they have an end. Yes, sure, I agree with you.
So all to say that I think it's important to, I think that more people want to end the conflict than we assume. I think that a lot of them have lost hope, and I think it's our job, among others, to bring that hope back to the table. Because so that's number one. Regarding your question about the settlements, it's important for me to reiterate. The settlements are an illegal enterprise, which we oppose. We oppose the occupation. We comply and respect international law, and we also appreciate human rights. This I say as an Israeli Jew, and I also say this as an executive director of Land for All, and I'm also saying this as someone who is leading an organization in partnership with a Palestinian organization. And so you could imagine that there would never be an Israeli-Palestinian partnership without opposing occupation and opposing the settlement enterprise.
Sure.
Having said that, yes, what we're doing is challenging, we are, and Meron said that very elegantly, I think we're talking about decolonizing the settlement enterprise, and so saying we won't have settlements anymore. What we will have is groups of Jews living in the Palestinian independent, safe, sovereign state. And this will have to be in compliance with the Palestinian state. It won't be for us to decide how many people live and where they live. This will be a decision that the Palestinian state will have to make. I will say that if we take the route that we offer of freedom of movement, eventually of open borders, of respecting and acknowledging the sentiment of this entire homeland that belongs to all the people, I assume it will be easier. I also want to say that there are a lot of people who have talked about how to evacuate settlements. You are correct that there are 750,000 people, is Jews living behind the behind the Green Line. 300,000 of them are in Jerusalem, the rest in the West Bank. I want to say that if and when the peace will come and the occupation will end, a lot of them are not ideological. And so I assume that most of them will want to come back to Israel one way or another with an agreement of some sorts, reparations of some sorts, and will move automatically back to Israel. A lot of them are economic, people looking for a better deal for their apartment in Israel, reinforcing the settlement enterprise, and has been making that very available and cheaper to rent apartments behind the Green Line. And so now you see even ultra-Orthodox cities behind the Green Line. They used to have zero ideology when it comes to Palestine. Things have been changing on that end as well, but all to say that you are correct, and we agree that trying to evacuate all the settlers is going to be very
war.
Yeah, might lead to war. And so what we're saying is, we believe that some of them will be evacuated by choice. And some of them, but again, only dependent on the Palestinian state, will be able to live in Palestine if it's so important for them to live in that piece of land. But it cannot maintain the Jewish superiority. And so if it's a very ideal.
Oh, absolutely, sure.
So, okay. And again, I really recommend you reading our vision. And we're also working on some more concrete writings about settlements and about security and about all these big questions that are definitely challenging.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Olivia. Let me call the names again so that there's some order here. But I want to say, you may be thinking of ending the settlement as a political entity. That may be what you're referring to. So let's have the next will be Sharon Perez, and then Walid Abu Tayeh, and then Samir Twer, and then Sean. Okay, Sharon, please.
Hi. Okay, so I think the time is getting. I want to thank my PUNDAKs, and the other organizers, Mr. Joseph Vassar. It's been very interesting. I don't actually have a question. I kind of wish we could have a dialogue. I wanted to reply to Samir Twer, and I hope he's still there, about what he said about like the BDS. I mean, there's so many things I could. Basically, I wanted to say that I don't support the BDS movement per se, but I do understand exactly what you're saying, Samir. I do think, and I'm not the only one, that the conflict will be possibly settled or moved along as a result of international pressure, including economic pressure on Israel. Unfortunately, it's very easy to say, oh, BDS movement, it's very bad. It's not, but actually, I think that is indeed the case. So just so you know, there are Jewish Israelis who, I think it's okay what Ben and Jerry ice cream did, frankly. And okay, just wanted to say that. And thank you again for the organizers.
So Sharon, let me ask you, are you part of Land for All, and why not?
I'm just too involved with like other things, but I've been to other meetings of yours, including face-to-face meetings. I'm so invested right now with, you know, women, wage, peace. So, but you can sign me up. You can sign me up. I'll
Well,
put my email address
we
on
have a
the,
different vision. I'm just
I
curious.
know you
Yeah.
do. I know
Okay.
you do.
All right, let's go to Walid. Please, thank you for your patience, Walid.
Yeah, hi, I'm Walid Abutai. I'm from Nazareth. I have the Israeli citizen. I living in East Jerusalem, and I also lived in Orlando and Los Gatos in San Francisco. I think the only way, the only solution is one democratic state. To two states, one land, it's very difficult because of the settlers. It's about 1 million settlers in the West Bank. Also, another thing, we share everything. We share the water, we share the electronic atmosphere, we share the water, we share everything. It's difficult to make two states. It's only one democratic state. And I think there is a, here in all from the river to the sea, we have 8 million Arab and 8 million Jewish. So we have to make one state for all the citizens. That means to give the population in the West Bank the citizenship, and we have to share everything: the government, the parliament, the economics, the land, everything. I think there is a way to start with this if we can start in East Jerusalem, because in Jerusalem we have 40% of the population is the Arab. So we can start this the solution in Jerusalem if the Israelis stop to be a state of Jewish state. The state here must be one democratic state for all the people, not two states, because we have suffered for the Oslo agreement. Thank you.
Mai?
Yeah, thank you, Walid. I agree with nearly everything. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think and you know, in many ways, I pray that we will get maybe one day to a one big democratic state. I think that in order to right now achieve democracy and equality, I think that right now the best, at least transitional stage, and you know, maybe in 100 years, nation states will be irrelevant in this world. I'm thinking about, you know, global warming and about much bigger tasks that we have as humanity. But I think that right now, at least the people that are part of our movement, and it's an interesting conversation to have, still believe that that both Palestinians and Israelis deserve a state of their own for now, you know, at least for now.
We have to stop the bloodshed for
That's
both.
That's absolute. There's no doubt about that.
And
No doubt
we
about
have a way to solve, to reach the one democratic state. It's through the Jerusalem municipality. If we share the Jerusalem municipality, as we can take it as a model of all the Palestine. If we can participate in the election in the municipality, it's the Jerusalem metropole is a model of all the Eretz Israel, or the historical Palestine.
And that's part of our solution. We agree with that. I think that that's very important. I think that would be thinking about political imagination, right? Like once we achieve the political, you know, once we, you know, live the political imagination that we're talking about now of a safe and two states and peace, I think that Jerusalem will be really what we say in Hebrew, or lagoim. I mean, that will be the model that people will aspire
Yes,
to.
this is
I
the
agree.
model.
I agree with that, definitely. And that's part of our model as well. Jerusalem will be a shared city.
So you seem to be agreeing with Waleed that one state is a good solution. It's
No, that's not what I said.
Oh,
I didn't.
okay.
No. That's not what I said. I said that as someone who was, excuse me, I'm just gonna put myself in into the electricity here, so I won't lose you all. What I said is that I think it's very important that we stay relevant. And when I say stay relevant, for me, I have an 8-month-old baby. I do not know if a nation state is what she needs to aspire to. I don't know. And most of you are US citizens, so I guess that you have a different understanding of what statehood is. For me, and this is the way I was brought up, and this is my trauma, and I'm third generation Holocaust, and I have the stories that made me. I still believe that in order to see peace between Israel and Palestine, two separate states as a political entity and expression of our identity is important. Maybe it's just a stage, maybe we'll live in a world where borders and nation states are irrelevant, maybe. But right now we don't live in that situation. And for me, I'm trying to imagine and to be, to have a vision. Maybe I'm not going further enough, but for me right now, two independent states who share, pretty much everything is good enough. I'm very happy with that. And I think that that's right now the only pragmatic possible solution.
Take Belgium or Canada. Belgium or Canada, they have 3 nations. They have one citizen, the citizen for all. They have 3 nations, 3 identity. In Canada, 2 identity or 3 identity in one citizen. They have 1 citizen and 3 identity or 2 identities. Sorry to disrupt.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, Canada have a different history though. Canada do not have the history of the Jewish people and do not have the history of the conflict of Israel and Palestine. And so we also need to be aware of, who we're dealing with. I can tell you that from my understanding of the Jewish society in Israel, right now, one state is just impossible. And I rather see a pragmatic solution as fast as possible and end occupation now, than aspire to something that I don't think right now will happen in the near future. So I'm really honestly trying to be pragmatic.
All right, let's go to Samir again. If you need to, I don't know, your hand is raised, so I don't know if you want to.
Yes,
and then Sean, and then David Mandel. Go ahead, Samir.
Hi. Yes, I think if there is a solution today, that will be in the hands of the Israelis, in the hands of the peace camp, to change their government, to make a government or to bring in a government who's willing to end apartheid regime and to end the occupation and have elections in all historic Palestine and give all the people 3 choices: 1 state solution, 2 state solution, and IPC. And let the people, the whole people, whether Israelis or Palestinians, to decide what kind of government they need. If there is a solution, that will be it. Thank you.
We're trying. Well, Samir, we're trying. I'm here in Israel. We're trying.
Okay,
Inshallah.
thank you.
Okay,
Inshallah.
let's go to Sean. Sean.
Hi. Forgive me, Joseph. I know I'm the last one, but the
No,
thing is,
David is after you.
oh yeah, okay. Anyway, for my, I appreciate your solution and end occupation and bring peace between the two people and the land for all, you know. But I have one question: are you getting attacked by some smear campaigns who are trying to attack you and ruin your reputation? Because a lot of people are getting attacked because they criticize Israel or they don't like what Israel's doing. So some smear campaign are attacking people who criticize Israel, calling them anti-Semitic, calling them name calling or any slur they can to attack those people, you know. And so anybody who doesn't agree or with the Israel agenda, they get attacked with those campaigns. So are you getting that daily? Are you getting that often? Because you don't agree with the Israeli government?
Well, I think that today everyone who disagrees with the Israeli government is getting smeared. That's number one. It's pretty, as you said, it's pretty easy being smeared these days. So that's first of all, and definitely the atmosphere in Israel has gotten more and more violent. Even in the past 5 years, I would say things have gotten much worse in the public space. So that's number one. Number two, I want to say that there's something about our solution that is very special. It's kind of non-binary in many ways, kind of breaks a lot of binaries. So for example, all the solution until now have been very kind of use the language that is very liberal, very European, very secular. And so, you know, not a lot of language or discourse or acknowledgement of a sentiment that is maybe more traditional, maybe even more religious. And so the fact that we are talking about acknowledging the belonging of the Jewish people to this entire homeland, also to the West Bank, and talking about equality puts us in a place where people are like, wait, what? What? So wait, what? It's confusing to them, which is great. We love confusing people. So, I mean, we love confusing people on that end when they're like, oh, we can actually, those two can coexist. That's amazing. I didn't know that can happen. And so for me, that actually is one of my favorite things about Land for All, right? That you can actually say, oh, yes, I recognize that it's important for you to live in a place that, you know, your ancestors lived in, and that you feel that is, you know, a very important part of your identity. And at the same time, I completely, you know, I'm 100% against like inequality, and I will not accept any kind of superiority or power over a minority. And so that's number two. So what I mean to say is that actually that sometimes gives us kind of a head start because we're different than other solutions. I'll just say one more thing, which is important for me to say in this forum, which is about anti-Semitism. I actually think that Israel should be a bigger part of the conversation around anti-Semitism. It somehow remains a conversation for Jews outside of Israel, although I believe that Israelis have a lot to contribute and responsibility to take around what's happening today. I think that anti-Semitism is very real, and at the same time, Islamophobia is very real, and sometimes those two mix up. Sometimes anti-Israel and anti-Semitism get mixed up. These things are yes, becoming more and more dangerous forces around the world, and I actually think that the more Israelis are tied back into this conversation and take more responsibility over the parts that we can, the better. So it's important for me to say, as a Jew, you know, living in Israel and not suffering directly from anti-Semitism and occupying millions of Palestinians at the same time in the name of Judaism, which again has no relevance to my Jewish upbringing. So
that's the problem, because there's two kinds. There's anti-Semitic accusation that's bogus, and then there's anti-Semitic accusation that's real. And when they start to blend together, that's going to create a real problem. So that's what 100%.
And I think that progressive Palestinian and Israelis have to actually fight that fight together as well. That's part of the fight that we need to fight together.
I agree with you.
Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and we see that with the Trump era, have completely become one, right? Like, so here we have another thing to do together.
Thank
All
you.
right, let's
I
go
agree.
to,
Thanks.
sorry, let's go to David Mandel and then Shlomo Or after David. Is it okay with you?
I really have to end because I need to put another hat on, which is a mom. So I would appreciate if we just maybe take 5 more minutes, and then
Okay,
I'll have to.
Sure. Or maybe Miran can stay and respond to those questions. Would that be okay, Miran?
No problem.
All right. Okay, so let's have David, and then if you need to leave, we'll have Miran take over. David, please ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thanks. It's been a very interesting discussion. I really appreciate it. And I like a lot of the considerations that Maya is giving to, some of the bigger issues that sometimes we ignore, like our attachment to land and anti-Semitism and all that. I asked a question in the chat, a quick question I would like an answer to. In your organization, is there, to what extent is there something approaching equal balance between active members who are Israeli Jews and who are Palestinians? And I don't mean just constructing leadership of equal numbers, but of actual active supporters. That's a quick answer that you can give. And then the final thing I'd like to make is a couple comments. I find your idea very attractive. I like the one democratic state idea, the old-fashioned two-state idea that I supported for a long time when it seemed realistic, and also Joseph's Confederation idea. I mean, I think it's important and useful to have these kind of visions out there and to discuss them. I hate to see us get hung up on debating which one is the best, because none of them are about to happen right now. And what the larger problem where I think we all need to work together is the fact that there's this huge imbalance of power between Israel and the Palestinians. That needs to involve a major change in politics in the global scene. Sitting in the United States as I am, and also being an Israeli citizen since I lived there in the past in a long time, I think our bigger task where we need to work together is to really change public opinion here in Europe and elsewhere in the world, and through that to change policies. And that, obviously is a daunting task, and it involves not only changing policies toward Palestine and Israel, but also toward U.S. meddling in imperial policies throughout the world. And I hope that we won't lose sight of the immediate importance of that as we discuss possible beautiful visions for the future regarding Israel and Palestine themselves. Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
I'll just answer your question and say, I will start by saying that we are and have always been and hopefully will always be an Israeli-Palestinian organization. We actually just hired our first Palestinian director. We have a group of Palestinians who are part of this initiative pretty much from day one. And I will even go further and say 2 things. That since the Geneva Agreement, there hasn't been an Israeli-Palestinian co-led, solution. And that's pretty incredible that is even being achieved, that Israelis and Palestinians agree on anything, let alone a solution to the conflict. So I'm not tooting my own.
There's the one democratic state organization built around the declaration. I should be familiar with it.
Okay, yes, but I don't know enough about the history of it, but so let's say that there are 2. That's still incredible. And I wasn't part of this process, so I feel like I can be very congratulating about this achievement. I wasn't a part of it. This is Meron's work, and I think it's incredible and really remarkable. And so, yay, Meron! Thank you for doing that for all of us. I do want to say that on one hand, I tell you that in my experience in the past, I don't know, 15 years of work, I have seen some pretty incredible support for this organization from Palestinians, even from young Palestinians, in a way that I haven't seen before, because things have been so depressing, and so and there has been such a lack of hope and lack of willing from the Palestinian community to actually be involved with any kind of a solution, because it's so irrelevant for so many Palestinians to talk about solution while occupation continues. So I was actually overwhelmed and very joyful to see such support that I haven't seen in many years. I will also say that, yeah, of course, this is the price that Palestinians pay in talking to Israelis and in talking about a solution and not only focusing on occupation is extremely high and very difficult. And so, no, I cannot compare the numbers or the resources or the leadership from the Israeli and Palestinian part. There's definitely still a big gap that we are trying to support as much as we can, and raise funds for them to do the work. And so I'm kind of leaving you with both, and this is where we're at as well. You know, on one hand, we're overjoyed by the support. We don't take it for granted. And on the other hand, there's still so much work to be done. And of course, the power dynamic is very real, you know, and that's a whole other conversation we can have.
All right,
thank you, Joseph. Thank you for
organizing. I'll let you go and wear your other hat. Let me have Shlomo unfortunately had to leave. So I just have one.
I'll just say goodbye and thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for your very insightful questions.
Thank you. Stay safe. Thank you.
Take
care.
So much.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Joseph.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Olivia, did you want to ask another question?
Well, I'm not sufficiently familiar with the plan. Mai has spoken about 2 states, and I think opinion polls point in that direction as far as what Jewish people want at the moment and as far as what Palestinian people want. But my question to the other gentleman, I think his name is Meran, I'm not sure.
Meran Rappaport.
Meran, who will govern the Palestinian state? Who will run it?
The Palestinian state will be governed by the Palestinian people. They will have an election and they will vote their leaders. They will vote the parliament and the government and the president, whatever system they will choose. Of course, it has to be a democratic regime, because I don't think that 2 independent states can live under the same roof without being democratic, both of them. But it will be governed by the Palestinian. They will have. I think the best way again is to look at the EU model. For me, although there are other models, it has been mentioned here in the comments, Belgium, and there are models that are more, let's say, federation, not confederation. But for the EU model, of course, the people of France vote for the French parliament and French president, and the people of Germany who vote for the Bundestag and the German chancellor. But they still enjoy freedom of movement, freedom of residence. French person can live in Germany and vice versa. So I think, yes, there is here a mixture between independence and ruling and ruling your own fate, having a power to rule your own fate, on the one hand, and at the same time, a shared space run together for the things that must be shared. And there are a lot of issues that must be shared. This is human rights and economy and workers' rights and security, of course, and climate change. There are so many things in such a small, and I think this is what Walid is referring to. It is a small space between the river and the sea. It's really very, very small. So there are so many issues that has to be run together anyhow, in any case. But I think what we are offering here is two independent states with open borders, wherever one can live wherever he wants.
What about defense? What about defense?
What about defense?
What kind of defense will the Palestinians have?
Again, there will be a Palestinian defense force and an Israeli defense force. Israel will not have forces neither in the West Bank or in Gaza or in East Jerusalem. It will have independent defense force, and but still, of course, there has to be coordination between the two independent defense forces and also joint forces also on the external border of the Confederation, meaning joint Israeli-Palestinian forces on the Jordan Valley, on the border between the Israel-Palestinian Confederation with Egypt, on the border with Lebanon. There will be joint defense forces. But again, I have to stress, and I said it before, we are not the politician. We are offering a framework that is realistic, that is connected to reality, yes, but the exact details, to tell you now honestly and sincerely and seriously how exactly will the security arrangement will look like, it's presumptuous. I cannot do it, but I can.
Of course, I understand that.
But I can say that it will be based on the idea, on the principle of equality, meaning that there will be no Jewish Israeli supremacy on the Palestinian state.
We're all against that. We're all against that.
So again, the details have to be, at the end,
worked out, yes.
Worked out among the representative of the Palestinian people and the representative of
yes.
Israel.
I can't imagine them sharing intelligence, for example. There are things that
sharing intelligence. Sharing intelligence is the easiest thing. They share intelligence. Unfortunately, I think the Palestinian will say, unfortunately, today Israel and the PA are sharing intelligence.
Absolutely, and Hamas, yes, oh yes, yes.
Most of the Palestinians don't like it.
Yeah, sure, I agree. I do wonder what makes you think that within Palestine they could do a better job of governing their people than they're doing today. The kind of clan type voting they have. I mean, it's not a, it's a very corrupt government. And what makes you think that it could be better? I mean, I do wish it was better. Of course I do.
I cannot speak for the Palestinian, but I think the Palestinian are a much more, their soul is very democratic. That is my impression. I meet a lot of Palestinians. The fact that there is no democracy in Palestine is today, yes, it has to do with problems, internal problems, but first of all, the reality of occupation. This is what
absolutely compounds everything.
I think, and the Palestinian here, Walid and other on this group can say the Palestinians are the most educated people.
Absolutely.
In the Middle
East. I totally agree with all this.
In the Middle East, except maybe the higher level of education, universities in the Middle East, maybe after Israel. So I think I am a great believer in the ability of the Palestinian to create a very
Yes.
prosperous and democratic state.
Oh, yes, aren't we? Well, we all hope that. I think they have to first fight oppression within the family as well. I think it's complex. There's lots of oppression they have to fight. Of course, the occupation, of course. Yes, of course. Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you, Milan.
Okay, Samir, do you have another question, or is your
No,
hand?
that's
Okay.
about it. Thank
All
you.
right, so I just want,
I just want one thing regarding again what to Walid question and my in a way answered some of it, but I think we have to also remember that there is the international law, and the international community did recognize the right of Palestinian to have their own state. It was recognized by numerous UN and other international organizations, including the International Court of Justice. And I think we cannot give up this so easily, this achievement that the Palestinians did have. Yeah, I know that it didn't materialize into a real state, but this international recognition cannot be ignored. And I think, therefore, I think the way is through independent Palestine and the occupation, but at the same time, leaving this this homeland that we all love run together, and especially Jerusalem, run together by its Palestinian and Jewish resident.
all right. Thank you so much, Miron. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hopefully, we'll see you in our next simulation, and I would love to hear some comments. If you want me to invite more people with different visions, that would be I would love to do that. And if you can give me feedbacks, that would be appreciated. All right. Other than that, I am closing the event today, and hope to see you next time.